And to discuss this further, I'm joined in the studio by Faruk Logoglu, who is a former Turkish ambassador to the US, and by our very own journalist Selim Atalay, who's been on the show before. Thank you so much for being here. Let me begin with you, Ambassador. Now, you were also a long-time member of the CHP, which is in the opposition right now, and we've known CHP and the AK Party have had differences in the past on a variety of issues. How important is it to unite for political groups when a military operation like this takes place on the Syrian border?
Well, I think this is a reflex deeply ingrained in Turkish culture. And you can put it in two ways. One is when the issue is national, everybody unites behind that position taken by the government, whoever it might be in power. The second, which is perhaps more visible and concrete, is when Mehmetçik, the Turkish soldier, is on stage, everybody falls in line behind him. And this is what happened. As soon as the Turkish soldier, Mehmetçik, crossed into Syria, even when the Turkish jets started bombarding Afrin targets, I think the Turkish public, irrespective of their differences, political differences over other issues, all parties, including CHP, supported this operation, clearly for very obvious reasons. This was to secure Turkey's borders, to clean the area of terrorist groups, and to prevent the formation of a YPG, continuous strip of land across northern Syria. Of course, after the achievement of these objectives, the idea is to put people back in there to live in safety.
This is a very interesting point that the ambassador raises, Selim,
Sure.
to return Syrian refugees to any future safe zone, which is also one of the stated objectives. Does the political consensus reflect consensus among the public on the ground, Selim?
Yes, of course, it's the security. The primary issue is the security of the border, security of the nation. And we know that something adverse going on the other side of the border. Syria is ungovernable, that territory is ungovernable, and some terrorist groups are taking advantage of it and waiting for their time to attack. They're not going to stay over there. We knew that. So there's a pressure towards the border, there's pressure towards Hatay region, and in addition, we have an ally who is arming this group, a NATO ally who's arming this group and seems to be contradicting.
I guess it's a very complicated picture for Turkey.
Yes.
It's a very complicated picture for Turkey as far as both external and internal dynamics are concerned. You've got the PKK inside, you've got the YPG there,
Sure.
but also internally, you've got the MHP, which is against the settlement of Syrians or the absorption of these 3 million Syrian refugees. So do you think there's some sort of carrot and stick, political carrot and stick here that is at work?
I don't think so. Refugees, the Syrian refugees in Turkey are guests, and they're not here to stay. If they prefer to stay,
Yeah, but there was talk of
they will
integrating
stay.
them, giving them citizenship. There has been talk of that.
Sure, probably Mrs. Merkel has the same idea, or any other European country who is allowing refugees in, or any general refugee policy requires that. Nations sometimes need external refugees to beef up their population. Yes, that's being done. Maybe Turkey is facing a de facto situation. But back to the political consensus, the reason is twofold. One is the security concerns. The second is the deteriorating situation in Syria, the ungovernable territories. And third is the US factor, an ally who seemingly has turned against Turkey. So if anything, the US factor is also uniting the Turkish people against...
It's interesting that you raise it because Ambassador here has served as a diplomat, as Turkey's top diplomat in the United States. And you were, according to Selim earlier, we were talking about it, you were known as the hawk.
Not on all issues, but
do you think Turkey needs a more hawkish approach when it comes to the United States on this issue? Even more hawkish?
Turkey needs to be hawkish on its national issues and national interests. We don't really have a real interest in confronting all powers of the world, be it Russia or the United States. We need good relations with all of them. But standing for your own interests and for your own principles, fine. But even today, I think President Erdogan is going to talk with President Trump. And despite all these differences, especially over YPG, I think Turkey and the US do have a chance to come together, to converge their interests at
Yeah,
some,
but what would you
point.
say to critics that say that maybe Turkey has been too accommodating of its American NATO partners?
Well, it depends on what subject you are talking about. I think...
Oh, specifically on YPG and the growth of the YPG.
Turkey has been patient. I think the US policy on Syria has been wrong, as has been Turkish policy on Syria that has been wrong for a number of years. Now Turkey is making an effort to mend its Syrian policy, its Syrian position. But I think the last straw that broke the camel's back was the US decision to create this 30,000 YPG-centered border security force. Despite all the warnings from Turkey, which went unheeded in the US, in Washington.
Well, they've been backtracking on it as well. There's confusion coming from the
But I think basically they still regard YPG as their main ally in Syria, not just in the fight against ISIL, but also generally and in broader terms. They invest their trump cards in the Syrian Kurds, while Russia invests its cards in the Assad regime, and Turkey opposes both of them.
How does this play out in Turkey? This American support for a group that is a prescribed terrorist organization as far as Turkey. What do the people think about this, Selim?
They are very angry. They are very angry that a NATO ally, our primary ally, is aligning with a bunch of whatever, I don't want to use the word, and then arming them to their teeth. And then if the idea is running them against ISIL, sure, every country has the right to use its own mercenaries and their tools. But if the ISIL is over, which is interestingly not being announced yet, where is ISIL in Syria is the question. And then continuing to arm them, and then continue to arm them despite a promise by President Trump to President Erdogan that the arm flows will be stopped. I'm afraid no one listens to President Trump these days. So a CENTCOM that is running its own show, and border security force or border force. Which border? We are talking about the Turkish border. We are talking about a NATO ally border.
It's a NATO border.
It's a NATO border, and you are trying to subvert this NATO ally from the other side of the border with this force. It's just inconceivable, and it's also in shambles that the U.S. policy is in this situation.
Ambassador,
Yes.
have U.S.-Turkey ties reached a point of no return first, and then how does Russia and Iran fit into Turkish policy moving forward?
No, the Turkish-American relations have not reached a point of no return. Very serious difficulties, which will eventually be, as far as I'm concerned, be resolved. It will take time, patience, and good diplomatic work. As far as Russia and Iran are concerned, I think circumstances and policies of different actors, especially of the US, have pushed Turkey to cooperate more fully with both Russia and Iran, which is not a bad thing, so long as it serves to bring peace and stability to Syria. But I think Turkey must be beware of its relations, especially with Russia. I always support very strong cooperation between Iran and Turkey as regional powers, because that develops into regional ownership of the issues of the region.
There's one aspect to it, the external dynamics. But internally, we're talking about a consensus, a widespread consensus, but not everyone is on board.
And not everyone is on board, for instance, towards maintaining relations with the United States. There's some reaction on why President Erdogan is still talking to Trump. There's very massive reaction on why Turkey is still dealing with the US. So there's reaction on that side. It's very interesting. Turkey was not as angry as like this as before. Now, back to square one, there's too much history. Just very recent statements I think matter more. One is, yes, they've given up on this border force. Number two, promises needs to be kept about these weapons. No one is very much hopeful about how they'll be recollected, but yes, let's see the attempt a little bit. And then the third thing, how to govern Syria is not a matter of arms and occupation, but there's political process going on. There's talk about Astana, there's talk about Sochi, there's talk about Geneva. So let's see what the actors are doing in that sense. And one maybe positive signal was from Secretary Mattis, Defense Secretary. He called Turkey as our NATO ally. That's given, okay. And he called the other group as tactical cooperation, our tactical cooperation with the YPG.
Well, you raised an interesting point. I want you to take your diplomat cap off and put your CHP cap on for a second. Can we expect this consensus? We saw Kılıçdaroğlu, the opposition leader, CHP leader, stand with Prime Minister Yildirim together, showing a united front. Can we expect this consensus, this political consensus, to go beyond military operations?
Probably not. It depends on exactly what happens with the military operations. Because so far, as you said earlier in your program, the international reaction has been mixed and generally mild. Almost everybody recognizes the right of Turkey to defend itself. And this is specified in the UN Charter, Article 51, legitimate self-defense and so forth. Also the fight against terrorism. But all have also expressed concern about the duration and scope of this operation, including collateral damage to civilians. So I think the government probably had an excellent entry strategy, but it must have an equally good, solid exit strategy in order to reap the benefits of this.
Selim, I'll give you the last word.
Still, the targets are obvious, and the Turkish nation is united against common threat, which is very obvious, and sacrifices have been made. They will continue, and also you just mentioned things are still being shuffled in the area. So alliances, ad hoc tactical cooperation, and shifting balances. A United States rediscovering its own ally, NATO ally. So things are still developing. So I'm sure every player is guarding their own national interest. America first, and sure, Turkey first is on the side of the border. And there's talk about President Trump talking to Mr. Erdogan on the telephone very soon. So let's see what happens. Military operation continues. Turkish nation support is there, and alliances are still being reshuffled.
Selim Atalay, Ambassador Logoglu, thank you so much.
Thank you.